Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the TexProtects Zoom Lunch and Learn series, How Texas Bills Become Laws. My name is Jennifer Lisi, and I'm the Managing Director of Policy at TexProtects, and I'm joined by our CPS Policy and Research Analyst, Carrie Judice, and our Prevention Research and Policy Specialist, Brittany Taylor, as well as a superstar team of House and Senate staff members from the 87th legislative session and some others to talk to you today about the policy process in Texas. TexProtects is the only statewide advocacy organization singularly focused on the prevention of child abuse and neglect, and we do that work by partnering with legislative offices and their staff, and we do that by partnering with you. And so we hope that today we can demystify what sometimes seems to be an overwhelming process and empower you to champion children this legislative session in partnership with the leaders who are working inside the building to make good choices for kids right now. With that, I want to take a moment to just do a little bit of housekeeping. If you'll notice at the bottom of your screen, there's a chat box, and you're welcome to participate there in conversation with each other throughout the webinar. But if you have questions that you'd like the panelists to address as we go, or hopefully we'll have some time at the end, drop those questions in the Q&A box, and we can respond throughout the webinar, or as I said, at the end, as time allows. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Carrie to talk about our agenda for today.
Yeah, so as Jennifer said, today we're going to be talking about how bills become laws here in Texas. And while the process for coming up with a bill really is year-round, the time for those ideas to become bills and then for those bills to potentially become laws occurs during a legislative session. And session here in Texas lasts for 140 days every other year on odd-numbered years, and we are in the middle of one now. I believe we're about a third of the way through, which is crazy to say out loud. In each of the last two sessions, just for some context, Texas lawmakers filed around 7,000 bills, and on average around 1,300 passed. So as you can imagine with those numbers, things are happening fast and require people like you on this webinar and organizations like us at TexProtects to help legislators understand what's most important to focus on. As you probably are gathering from the infographic on your screen, a bill must go through a lot of steps to pass. But we're going to summarize those and talk about them today in what we hope is a more digestible way. There are two chambers, the House and Senate, that a bill must go through before it can be signed into law. And while what you see on your screen may look like there's really only one pathway, I want to make sure to point out that a bill can start in either the House or the Senate, or possibly even travel through both of those at the same time. But there is a very similar series of steps in each chamber, which is represented by the different colors on your screen. And there's a particular order to those steps. Another thing to point out is that many things can come up along the way and cause some steps to need further nudging and advocacy before moving on to the next. Each of these steps represents many exchanges of hands and therefore different conversations that are necessary with different legislators and committees. And so that is why we are encouraging people like you to get engaged throughout the process. It's not a speak up once and then you're done kind of thing. It helps to be persistent to see that a bill makes it through each of these steps to the finish line. We hope that you will leave this webinar feeling like you know the different parts of the legislative process that you can engage in, and that ultimately you can see how the relationships that you build with your representatives and how your advocacy is so critical. So next to talk here is Brittany, and she's going to kind of walk through what those steps are.
Thank you, Carrie. Today we're going to be talking about the overarching steps of this process. So we've identified 8 different steps that are reflective of work in each chamber. So these are going to be our focus for today. These steps are 1, drafting language, 2, filing the bill, 3, when a bill has been referred to committee, 4, the committee work that is done, 5, the calendars process, 6, what happens on the floor. 7, conference committee after the bill has gone through both the House and the Senate. And 8, the signing of the bill into law. So we're going to be going through each of these steps one by one. And again, if you have any questions as we talk about each of these, please remember you can drop them in the Q&A feature, and we'll get to those either during the presentation or at the end. I'm going to pass it back off to Carrie to talk about draft language.
I think I get to do that one. So number one is drafting language for a bill. And so this is the step in the process. This is the first step in the process, and where the ideas people have been working on during the interim between legislative sessions really get to come to life. So ideas for what that bill might be or do come from the legislative office itself, or sometimes from people like you. But ultimately, our leaders are looking for ways to solve the issues that their constituents are facing. They're responsible to their constituents to tackle the most critical issues. And members of different committees are also tasked with the issues that come up in their committee of jurisdiction. But they can't necessarily know what those issues are unless they've spoken to you. And so they need to hear from those on the front lines to understand what the problems are, what the research is saying works and doesn't, and what the best solutions may be. All that's required of you is a willingness to have this conversation, collaborate, and be a resource for the legislative offices that you work with. Provide them the information that you know. You are the expert on your personal experiences and the things you have seen and read in your personal and professional life. And so please don't hesitate to share that information with those who have been elected to represent you. And also don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? So sometimes we might feel like we need to have, every duck in a row or understand the whole legislative process. But this is really just a relationship and an opportunity for you to share what you know. Offices will work with you. Staffers are fabulous allies and partners in talking through your experiences and how that might translate and align with the priorities of their bosses. And then once the ideas are worked out, they can work with attorneys and legislative counsel to get the right wording down on paper. It can be a back and forth process to get the language just right. The more we can kind of do on the front end, the less of those maybe twists and turns Carrie referred to. Maybe we can avoid some of those by doing smart work on the front end. But this is the beginning of a Texas bill becoming a law. And so I'm going to hand it over now to the fabulous Maddie Fletcher to talk a little bit about the importance of this step and how relationships with people and organizations like you can be a piece of this equation.
Hi, everyone. My name is Madeline Fletcher, and I serve as Chief of Staff for Representative Jared Patterson. Thank you for joining us today. And before I share about the drafting process, I'd like to share a little bit more about myself, as how I got to where I am today plays a big role in how I handle the legislative process. So I graduated from A&M in December of 2016 with a degree in communication and a minor in tourism management. My plan all throughout school had been to go into wedding planning upon graduation. However, I obviously chose a very different route. Thanks to an internship my last semester in college with the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, which is a state agency, I was introduced to policy. This also gave me some state-related experience to put on my resume, which ultimately landed me a job working as a legislative assistant for Representative Parker in 2017, which was the 85th legislative session. I came into the political world very interested in policy, but had extremely little experience when it came to actually handling it. And I'll even admit that I was reviewing a pamphlet titled "How a Bill Becomes a Law" on my first day on the job. My first informational that I actually attended as a staffer was none other than the wonderful TexProtects, and they were talking about how important it is that children in the foster care system stay close to home because studies showed that it would drastically improve their chances of success. I remember sitting in that informational and just being so in awe of the statistics and data that TexProtects presented. And as fate would have it, my former boss, Representative Parker, was and still is a partner of TexProtects, which gave me the opportunity to work closely with them in crafting legislation. The fact of the matter is I am nowhere near an expert on everything or anything. And even if I were, my experiences would be very limited. So when my boss comes to me with an idea, I reach out to the experts that I do know, that I've built relationships with, and the people that are actually involved in whatever topic I'm looking into, so I can start the first step of bill drafting, which is research. Sometimes bill ideas are what I like to call a Jared Patterson original, and other times they are from a constituent. I love it when a bill originates from a constituent, because more often than not, the constituent is actually very familiar with the issue and is most likely dealing with it firsthand and can typically speak to the issue very well. Once I've established a relationship with a constituent, I reach out to organizations I know specialize in that issue and get their take. This is really critical because an organization like TexProtects isn't going to give me a narrow view, but rather a statewide perspective. Texas is such a vast state, so unless we are dealing with a local bill, we need to think, how would this change affect Texas as a whole? Once I have concluded my research to the best of my abilities, I confer with my boss, and when I have his approval, I go to our portal and submit a legislative draft request that asks for or addresses a specific issue that we want to see resolved, and I also submit my research. Once that is submitted, the request is assigned to a drafter with the Legislative Counsel, which is a lawyer that specializes in that area of law that I've indicated. And it could be easy to assume that once a lawyer is involved, I wouldn't need the assistance of a constituent or any of the organizations that I'm working with to craft the legislation, but that couldn't be further from the truth, because drafters don't give policy recommendations. They just craft the legislation according to what the office asks and makes it fit legally, which is why I rely so heavily on stakeholders as we go back and forth to ensure that the bill language is exactly what we want. So it's absolutely key, just to drive this point home, that people are available to provide feedback and answer questions. We're here as an office to support the process of pushing it through, but we need people that are going to share that information, share their experiences with whatever issue we're looking into. So once that drafter has completed the draft, the bill goes on to be reviewed and then comes back to our office for approval. And at that point, I always run the bill by my boss, of course, and stakeholders to collect feedback before we file.
Thank you so much. We're so glad, I hope this is okay to say, that your life didn't go according to your plan and that you ended up in policy work. We've learned so much from you, and you're an expert in lots of things. Thank you for sharing your time and experience with us and our audience today. So that's step one. Step two is to file the bill. This is an exciting moment. You have the language on paper, and everyone's been able to ensure the wording is at least close enough to what you wanted it to be, and it's time to make it official and file the bill. And so whether you're working with a representative in the House or a senator in the Senate, they will file in their respective chamber. Sometimes bills are only filed in one chamber, and then they wind all the way through the process, one chamber at a time. And other times, you might have a bill filed in the House and the Senate, and the language matches, and they're moving through those chambers in a kind of parallel process so they can meet in the middle. Just for quick reference, remember that if a bill is filed in the House, you'll see HB in front of the number. And if a bill is filed in the Senate, you'll see SB in front of the bill number. So House bill or Senate bill. Another note here is that as you watch bills being filed and you see the bill number and the chamber that it's being filed in, you'll also see co-authors and joint authors coming alongside to sign on to the bill and work in partnership to get that bill to the finish line. Sometimes this is because they are aligned in value and want a partner to get the bill to the finish line. And sometimes those choices are strategic. For example, on a child protection bill, it's always a good idea to have partners who sit on the relevant committees to help guide the bill through the process. And this is actually a good segue into the next part of the process, number 3. which is when the bill gets referred to committee. And this has really started picking up in the last week or so in the 87th legislative session, that the couple thousand of bills that have been filed so far start getting referred out to committee. This usually happens about a month or two into session. And there are numerous committees in each of the chambers that have different topics of jurisdiction. For instance, some of the ones you'll hear TexProtects talk about a lot, budget matters in the Senate are taken on by the Finance Committee. Budget matters in the House are taken on by the House Appropriations Committee. A lot of our child protection and well-being issues go through the Senate Health and Human Services Committee on the Senate side, or through the Human Services or Public Health Committees on the House side. So committee chairs and the members of those committees are appointed by the leaders in each of the chambers. The Speaker of the House, Speaker Phelan, in this session, appoints chairs and members for each of the committees on the House side. And the Lieutenant Governor and President of the Senate, Dan Patrick, appoints chairs and members on the Senate side. And the legislators that chair these committees and their peers have a critical role to play in the process in deciding what are the most important bills that need to be heard within their committees. And committees really look to the experts, the advocates, to know what's most important, to receive comment on the bills and figure out solutions. And that's where the critical committee work part of the process really begins. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Carrie.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. So I like to think that really the committee work is where a bill really starts to get their legs, because there's just a lot of steps in this process and therefore really a lot of opportunities to engage. Once a bill is referred to committee, bills really need a push to get going. If the committee is flooded with input from people and organizations like you, or the legislators that represent you, because they know that this is a critical issue to you, a particular issue in a bill is necessary, they start to really hear this, that can really help a bill's chances of being set for a hearing. Committees need to be hearing about the importance of those bills, what it'll do and how the solution could help who you work with. So that's why it's so important to build those relationships with the chairs and the members of the committee, as well as their staff. A bill can't pass unless it's been formally heard in committee. So this is a really critical step. Once a bill is scheduled for a hearing, this is where people can more formally and publicly advocate for a bill. Again, you could be having conversations behind the scenes, but this is a little bit more public facing at this point. That can look as simple as what we call dropping a card, where you really just fill out either a physical or electronic form to simply communicate if you support or oppose a bill. It can also look like testimony. Testimony will be heard from what we call invited participants from the committee, such as the agencies it'll impact, people who work closely on the issue, and of course, there will be some public testimony, usually, from individuals or organizations like you guys, who have a unique perspective to offer and a story to share. So, again, this could be written form or verbal testimony, but that is generally where this work happens. It's never safe to assume that just because a bill has been heard in committee that it's going to move forward. So it requires a majority of the members of the committee to vote to pass that bill through the committee and on to the next step. Sometimes additional things need to happen, though, to get it moving again. It could get stuck in committee because maybe it doesn't have enough support. This is when changes may need to be made through amendments to appease the concerns that the members have, or it may require some additional educating of the legislators just to understand what the bill does or doesn't do, and why it's so important. So that, again, is where you guys come in. It may also help to have another push from your representatives, so when you're calling and writing those who represent you to say, hey, this is really important to me, can you also go and give a nudge to those in committee and show your support? So now I'm actually going to kind of let you guys hear from some insider knowledge from the Capitol about what's most helpful at this stage of the process, and how you all can kind of help connect the dots for the staffers. So Ryan, if you could come on screen and share.
Here I am. Yes, hello. I'm Ryan Alter. I'm the general counsel for Senator Hinojosa. I have been doing this work for quite some time. My first session was in 2011, but spent the past 3 sessions in Senator Watson's office. So definitely seen how it works, but the committee process, Carrie gave a good overview. Some things to remember. So when a bill is set for a committee hearing, that usually happens about a week before the actual hearing. And so once that happens, there will be a staff meeting amongst the members of the committee. So if, for instance, the HHS committee, the staff members of the members that sit on the committee will get together, usually on a Friday, and kind of go over the bills and talk about any questions that any staff member might have for another about what a bill does, or have they thought about this, that, or the other. So if you're working with an office on a bill, it's good to touch base with them after the staff meeting to see, were there any questions? Did any offices express any concerns that maybe we need to go follow up with and give them better information? Or maybe you just need to get some information to the member that is working on the bill for you so that they're prepared to answer those questions when they come up in the actual hearing. It's also useful both before the actual hearing, if you're going around talking to the various members on the committee or their staff, to have a good one-pager that clearly and succinctly, I can't emphasize succinctly enough, goes over your issues and why it's important and what it will do. But then, and that carries over, like I said, to the actual hearing. If you are going to testify and you want to provide something that is very useful for the members to be able to look down at while you're testifying or while others are testifying, that they can easily pick up various facts off of, that's really helpful. If it's, some longer, lots of text type item, it's not likely that the member is going to really be able to look at that at the hearing. They might give it to their staffer to look at, but if you want them to also listen to what is being said, you can't expect them to be reading this long long document that you give them. So when we talk about the hearing itself, if you do decide you want to testify, keeping it to the point, they limit the amount of time you have anyways, but definitely just try to stay on the issue. Sometimes people will do a kind of a whole diatribe into a lot of things that don't necessarily pertain to that bill. So keep your discussion to the bill that's going on, and also get to the point. You have a limited amount of time, so if you give a minute and a half about who you are and who you represent, then you basically just used half your time to talk about something that really doesn't affect why this bill is important. So definitely let them know who you are, but then get to the issue at hand. Personal stories are always good. They always make more of an impression than something that is more abstract. That obviously doesn't always apply, but just keep in mind, if you do have a good story that you can relate to the issue, that's helpful. And lastly, I will say, a lot of times when people show up to talk about bills that they don't like, they will just tell the committee, this is a bad bill. Sometimes they'll take the next step and tell them why it's a bad bill, which is helpful. But if you're going to do that, offer a solution. It is much more useful to the committee to say, look, I think this is problematic because X, Y, and Z, but here's how you could change it to eliminate that problem. That at least gives them a path to go forward and make changes instead of just saying, someone thinks this is a bad idea, but I don't know what to do about it. And then the last thing I'll say is, once the hearing is over, if there were some concerns, if they were from a specific member or two, follow up with those members to help answer their questions. You definitely want to, if you're working with an office, definitely start with them and say, hey, do you want me to go talk to, Senator such and such's staff? But if there's something that needs to be followed up on, that's your opportunity. You've got about a week between when the bill's heard from when the bill will be voted on to get things cleared up in case there's some kind of misunderstanding or just something needs to be fleshed out or changed. And with that, I'll send it back.
Ryan, thanks so much. I'm over here grinning. So first of all, you guys really got some true gems of tips from Ryan. That was really helpful to lay all that out, so I really appreciate that. But also it was kind of grinning because just last week, I don't know if several of you on this call also had participated. We talked about how you can be champions for kids in the 87th legislative session, and basically just kind of talked about the different ways that you can get involved in the process, such as writing your legislators and calling and getting involved in testimony. And so I feel like that is just so wonderful what you highlighted there, Ryan, just to go kind of hand in hand with some of the things that we were recommending, but more specifically for this audience to hear from someone inside the Capitol saying, yes, this is what's helpful. So thank you. And for those of you, as I mentioned this, if you want to check that out, we do have a recording of that. So just wanted to throw that out there. So now at this point, we have moved on to the next part of the process, which is calendars. So this is where a bill, let's just say it's made it this far in the process favorably. This will be assigned to a calendar to be considered for a vote by all the lawmakers in that particular chamber on the floor. So what you need to know here really is just that there are different kinds of calendars for different bills depending which chamber it's in. So, now's not the time to really rest easy just because it's made it through committee. Sometimes further advocacy is required to make sure that the bill makes it to the floor. Sometimes it may require you calling members of the calendars committee or asking that those who represent you request that the bill move forward. Because just remember that the part that Ryan just talked about, that is just where the members of that particular committee has heard the bill and voted on it. Now we're trying to get it to a position where all of the members in the chamber can vote for it. So I do want to ask that Jason come on here. He's going to kind of provide that insider knowledge on how the public plays a part in the calendars process. So Jason.
Hi, so I'm Jason Kirksey. I'm Senator Campbell's legislative director. I've worked in the ledge for 7 years now. This is my first session in the Senate. The previous 3 have been in the House, so I'm very familiar with the way that calendars work over there. So last session, what really helped a lot of individuals was just going around talking to members on calendars, calling their offices, sending them emails. I found short one-pagers with a couple of paragraphs were honestly the best way to get through with members and their staff. It all depends really just how calendars is run this time, because it changes from session to session just based off of who is the chair of that committee. So what worked last session may not work this session, but honestly, the things that Carrie listed and like what I just mentioned always work. Just make sure you talk to the members of calendars, you send them stuff, you write letters, and then also talking to other members that are signed on to the bills as JAs or co-authors to help also lobby for bills usually helps move them along in the process. And hopefully calendars in the House this time is run smoother than it was last time, because I personally had 17 bills dying calendars, both House bills and Senate bills that we handled. So hopefully it's a lot smoother process over there this time. Now, as far as the Senate goes, things are run a lot differently with calendars and stuff like that. So your best bet is to talk to members that are signed on to bills to help push them along in the process, because you have the order of business, which is basically a long list of every bill that was voted out of committee. And then you have the intent calendar, but unlike the House, bills aren't brought up in order. So you can have a bill sit on the intent calendar for weeks as long as the member keeps asking to have it put back on there. So your best bet there is to not only advocate to various members and stuff like that, but I would really push hard on the JAs and the co-authors of bills to help move it along, especially if it stays on the intent calendar for more than a week or two. So those are just a few tips. And if y'all have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them at the end.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Jason. And I hope, again, y'all are kind of getting probably a similar theme of just, it can feel like similar conversations and the same repetitive conversation over and over, but it is important to stay engaged throughout the process. And just real quick, I just want to clarify, I know Jason said JA a couple of times. And so just want to make sure to explain what that means. JA meaning joint author. So, you may have somebody championing the bill that you've worked with, but perhaps other members have signed on to the bill and are also, trying to make sure they see it through to the finish line. All right, so the next part here, if you can go ahead and, there we go, the floor. So now, just to kind of recap, bills made it through committee. They've, the calendar process has placed it on the calendar to be heard on the floor. While this is progress, again, work still needs to be done. Remember, only those in committee have voted, voted on the bill up until this point. But the floor is really where everyone in that chamber takes a vote. And that's a total of, 31 senators in the Senate and 150 representatives in the House. So to make sure that there's a positive result, that means additional conversations and advocacy are needed so that everyone knows the necessity of the bill passing. Each of your legislators need to know where you stand and how you want them to vote. You may even want to ask that they help advocate to their fellow lawmakers on your behalf. On the floor, there can be additional questions asked and debate amongst the members. This is also where additional amendments can be proposed. Legislators authoring the bill will need to be prepared for those discussions, and making sure their staff have what they need to prepare them well is really critical at this juncture. Also, if you have concerns about a bill that has gotten all the way to the floor for a vote, this is where your legislators need to know what your concerns are so that they can represent your voice and your opinion. The more people they hear from against a bill could help them step up and argue against it, and maybe even convince others as well. So Lonnie, if you can turn on your screen there, she's going to really talk about how she prepares her boss for the floor and how all the work really leading up to this step matters.
Yeah, hi everyone. It's great to be here with you all. Thank you for joining today. So my name is Lonnie. I am a policy analyst for Senator Nathan Johnson. A little bit about my background is I'm a licensed social worker. I have a background working in youth development and in nonprofit program management. I started working at the Capitol in Senator Sylvia Garcia's office. And last session, I worked in the House for Representative Ortega. And this session, I'm back in the Senate working for Senator Johnson. And so I just want to kind of explain when we're working on a bill, every single bill that we work on has, oh, I'm sorry, is my sound going in and out? Okay, well, I'm going to keep going and hopefully I can.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think if you hold it up, that'll work.
All right, great. Sorry about that. So I will just explain for every bill that we work on, we create a bill folder. It's called a bill book. And so all of the previous work that we've done throughout the session, the research and the bill language and the statute that it affects, all of that is going into this folder. And when a member is going down to the floor to discuss this bill and debate the bill, all of that goes in there, including other information such as the people that have supported this bill through calling our office, those that testified in support of the bill during committee, those that registered in support or in opposition while it was in committee. And so all of this is really important. It's important to come out prior to it getting on the floor so that we know who supports it and maybe some of the issues with the bill as well. And so we're able to fix them before that. But one of the things that we also put in this bill folder is potential questions that could be asked by other members while they're on the floor. And so I will kind of list out some questions and then the response to that. And where these questions, potential questions, come from are discussions that I've had with other people throughout the process. So this is where it's really important that you reach out to our office so we're able to discuss that bill and come up with some of these questions, some of the problems, some of the questions we may be getting from other members. I also want to say for the members who will be voting on this bill, so they didn't author it, but they will be voting on it when it's on the floor, it's also very important that you reach out to those offices so that they know that there are constituents and there are other people who are supporting this bill as it's going through the process. So hopefully I wasn't cutting out too much more, but I'll send it back to Carrie with that.
Thank you so much, Lonnie. That was very helpful. So up until this point, we've been talking about steps in the process and how each of these steps needs to happen in each of the chambers. So as you can imagine, after going through all of these steps and the winding path that we've taken so far in both the House and the Senate, sometimes a bill may look different after it has gone over to the other chamber. If this happens, this is where a conference committee comes in. So the goal of the conference committee is to reconcile the differences in the bill that each chamber came up with. So sometimes this difference can be a simple cleanup language that really has very minimal impact overall on the bill and how it will be implemented. But other times, full provisions could be added or wording could be changed in one of the versions so that it does something completely different. So regardless of the degree of differences, everyone needs to be on board with the end result in order to pass. Conference committees are assigned and are made up of a few delegates from each chamber to decide which version of the bill will be put up as the final draft version. Once that is decided, each chamber is then given an opportunity to vote on the bill again after having a chance to review the changes. The conference committee is largely a mystery, and each conference committee could go about this work differently. So to get some insider knowledge from the Capitol about this, I am going to toss it to Christina Masters. She is the staff for Representative Perez. So Christina, if you want to turn your video on and take it from here.
Hi, thank you, Brittany. It's been nice to hear from quite a few of my colleagues, and I will echo many things that they said. I have been on both sides. I was previously an advocate for child welfare for several years. I am an adoptive parent. And I really appreciate the work that TexProtects does. And I've had the good fortune to work with Carrie when she was a staffer and Jennifer last session. So I'm pleased to be here and I appreciate the work that everyone does. So as Brittany was saying, this is I wouldn't say a fun part of advocacy. This is conference committee. And although it doesn't happen terribly often, you do want to pay attention to ensure that the bill that you have been advocating for doesn't change in a negative way, or ensures that you keep some of the changes in there that you advocated really hard for. So I'm going to throw out a few vocabulary words that I hope won't additionally confuse things, but when you see a bill or resolution, when it passes through each of the 3 required readings in the Chamber of Origin, it's considered engrossed. And when it passes through the second chamber, it's considered enrolled. So a bill cannot be considered enrolled unless both versions are identical. So after the opposing chamber is done considering a bill, if it's made changes, it's returned to its Chamber of Origin. So there's quite a few technical rules about how long each chamber has to consider bills. And of course, there are exceptions to those rules which I won't go into great detail with, but at the end of the day, when a bill is returned and the layout period has elapsed or been suspended, the Chamber of Origin can do one of three things. They can either accept the changes, they can reject the changes and kill their bill, or they can reject the changes and request a conference committee. So at this point, most of the time, a lot of people like to think about how conference committees run, and the majority of the time, the bill authors on both sides, on the House and the Senate, are just going to have a conversation and talk it through. That's the majority of times. But on occasion, particularly in really big, fat, long, or really important bills, you're going to go to conference committee and everyone's going to sit down and have a conversation. So you're going to have 5 appointees on each side. The Senate side gets appointed by the Lieutenant Governor, and the House appointees are done by the Speaker of the House. And in each case, you're going to have the bill author as being one of the 5 on each side. So at this point, as advocates, once you see that a conference committee has been requested, you are going to want to go to those conferees on each side and do your advocating as to why it is that you need to accept the changes or reject the changes. Hopefully at this point, you have already got a relationship with the bill author, and that should always be your first stop. And, you know, again, it's not too much of an issue at this point of a lot of arguing back and forth. We, you know, as legislative offices have even been able to advocate for our own amendments. We've got to go up to our conference committee chairs and ask that they keep in some of the changes that maybe we made over on the House side and see if they'll stick up for you in conference committee. But it's interesting because there's a minority of members. It's not public information that it be recorded purposefully, hence the air of mystery around conference committees. But you just want to pay attention to who the members are, and you want to make sure that you are able to advocate with the bill authors on each side directly with what it is that you're hoping for. Hand them a one-pager for, hand each of the conferees a one-pager for when they walk into their meeting, if you're looking to do some strong advocacy so they're able to make their point to the opposing chamber. So I think that's it. Hopefully I explained that well because it is kind of complicated. So thanks for having me on.
That was great. Thank you so much, Christina. I think you definitely took some of the mystery out of the conference committees for us, so I appreciate it. So now we're going to move on to the actual signing of the bill. So the bill has been favorably voted on by all the lawmakers in each chamber. So now it's time for the respective leader in that chamber, either the Speaker of the House or the Lieutenant Governor in the Senate, to sign the bill. Once both chambers have passed the bill and it's been signed by both leaders of the chambers, the bill is sent along to the governor to be signed into law. But something important to note here is the governor is not required to sign the bill during the 140 days of session in order for the bill to law. Sometimes the governor signs bills in the legislative session, and sometimes it might be weeks later. It actually isn't required for the governor to sign a bill for it to go into effect. But as long as he doesn't veto a bill, it's going to move forward. Just for reference, the last 2 sessions, the governor has only vetoed a little over 50 bills out of the approximate 1,300 that pass each session. He generally will issue an explanation about why he chose to veto the bill. Sometimes it could be as simple as him not thinking that the bill goes far enough into actually being a law. And sometimes it can, if it was clear that another bill was tacked on at the end and he doesn't believe that was actually the intention of the legislation. Another thing to point out here is the effective date of bills that ultimately pass. Different bills may have different timelines to be implemented. However, most commonly, they will go into effect by September 1st, later of that same year, as that is the beginning of the next fiscal year, and sometimes bills are very closely tied to funding. Bills will also sometimes go into law immediately, and they could also have another specified date depending on the details that are included in the bill. Now we are going to move on to questions. I hope that you all feel like pros now about the legislative process. or at the very least that you feel like this process is a bit more accessible and you understand the very important part that you all can play. We really hope that today's information was digestible and helpful, and we hope that it sparks some excitement in you about this legislative session, and that you're really eager to get involved however you can. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions, or if you want to learn specific ways to join us in our work and learn how to be a champion for kids this session. That's why we're here. So I'm going to toss it back to Carrie and Jennifer for some questions.
I just couldn't be more thankful for our great team and the experts who have joined us today. I can't overstate how busy things are for them right now, and the gift of their time to educate all of us and give us that behind the scenes look is really a gift. So thank you for that. As you in the audience think about any questions that you might have, we're going to have about 10 minutes probably to tackle those. I would invite any of our panelists who are still on with us to turn your cameras back on so everybody can see you. And I thought in this transition time, I might just take a moment to share some of the high level takeaways I heard as we talked today. So we did our best to break it down to the simplest steps, but I know for some of you for whom this is totally new, it still might have seemed like an awful lot of steps, and it is. So a couple of things to know. One, just know you might hear from us about the same bill number a lot of times. And that's because, as you heard from everyone today and saw on the flow chart, there's a lot of stop signs on that flow chart. There's a lot of places where a bill could hit a snag or be changed in ways that might give us the opportunity to speak into that work. So if you've heard from us about HB 2333 and then a month later we're asking you again, we're probably asking you to do something just a little bit different, even though it's about the same bill. The other thing I would say is to be solution oriented and brief. I think we heard that lots of times. And so that's so important because of the speed and the number of issues that each office is having to handle. So that's really important. And then also want to reiterate in terms of your targets, right, that your own representative and senator are going to be #1 highest priority for you to reach out to and have your voice heard. They're accountable to you as a constituent. And then secondarily, the members of the committee that are hearing your bill of interest would be an important place for you to reach out. Remember that Texas Legislature Online, you can watch committee hearings. You can watch what's happening on the floor. Our website has a bill tracker where you can look at child protection bills and what's happening, where they are in the process. And then we'll try to keep you updated with resources and advocacy alerts when it's time for you to move and mobilize for the most important issues this session. So I don't see, there were a few questions that came throughout that I'll go back and address the answers for. Carrie, I don't know if you saw any in the chat maybe, but
there's one, and really honestly, any of the staffers we have with us can answer this question, so chime in. Basically the question is essentially, okay, so you've got people that are writing letters or they're sending in emails. Who in offices are reading those? And is everybody reading those? Are the representatives and senators able to see those? Is it staffers? How, any of you want to jump in and take that one on?
Yeah, I will. So our we have one staffer that kind of sifts through all our emails and then forwards it to whoever handles that specific policy area. So that's kind of the way we divvy things up. So we, keep track of everything, and that policy person or whatever is in charge of responding to those emails. So like I'm in charge of Article 2 HHS redistricting. So I handle any correspondence relating to those.
And I'll jump into that. If we do get something that's specific to a bill, we do enter that into our correspondence system. So it's easy for us to kind of run a report on that specific bill and see specifically constituents and who's reached out either in support or against a certain piece of legislation.
And I know Carrie had asked as well if the representative ever gets to see some of this correspondence. I know in my current office and my office previous, our policy was actually every single letter that goes out that has her name on it, my boss reads. So she gets to see the original letter, and she ensures that, you know, any correspondence that's coming from this office is approved by her. So my boss actually does read every single letter. So I know some of the Senate offices might not be able to have that capacity right now, as you know, but we've managed to do it in my last couple of offices, and I think it is really helpful. And also, I think it's great for constituents just to know that my boss is reading every single letter, and everything is done in her words and is how she feels.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Christina. And so I'll actually kind of piggyback, because you kind of said, and obviously we've got 3 Senate staffers still on with us today. So what does it take to kind of elevate? So I know in Senate offices, you know, like she said, capacity. What kind of gets your attention to say, as a staffer that, you know, handles a certain topic area, this is something that rises to the level that you want to, you know, present that to the senator? And I'm sure there's not a perfect equation in that, but as a staffer, how do you kind of sift through that?
I'll give it a stab. I don't know if I have a great answer on this. To me, the things that separate an issue that I might want to do more research on or talk to the senator about is really more about the issue and the message than it is about the volume with which I receive it, right? So if I receive 50 letters about something, certainly I say to myself, this is important and I want to look at it. But if I meet with somebody either on the phone or in a meeting, and you know, the issue itself, they're very, that they're able to demonstrate, here is how this issue is affecting real people, both in the district and beyond, and just making that connection of how the issue really has practical impacts, I think is more valuable than a bunch of letters. It's difficult for a lot of people, obviously, to call or to set up a meeting. I fully appreciate and understand that than writing a letter. But if you're able to really make that personal connection, it really does make a difference in a lot of regard.
Well, thank you, Ryan, for jumping in. And that actually kind of segues into another question that I'm seeing in the chat is, you know, so like you said, that personal connection. The question here is, you know, is the form of communication, do you value those differently? You know, so is it best to email? Is it best to call? Is it best to try to have that virtual meeting or in-person meeting? How do y'all kind of, is there a classification or not as far as like the value you put on those?
I wouldn't say there's a higher value between, you know, any kind of written communication versus a phone call. If it's something that you're wanting my boss's opinion on and you're wanting something like some kind of thorough response, we would very much appreciate something written down. So that way it's something, you know, sometimes on the spot, especially a lot of times the folks picking up our phones are interns. So they're brand new to this process and they may not know my boss's opinion on something right off the top of their head. And sometimes even as staff, We don't know all 7,000 bills that get passed, so we need to do a little bit of research on our own. And so just to have a little bit of time to be able to do that. I know I personally really appreciate, especially since my boss does like to read every single thing that goes out on her behalf. You know, no matter what, whether it's a phone call or a letter or an email, we, as it was mentioned earlier, I think Lainey said, you know, this is all entered into our databases. We all have the same database in every office. And so when my boss goes to the floor to do a vote, she can see that she got 10 constituent letters or emails for or against that particular bill. So either way, it'll get logged and it'll have that same amount of value. But if it's something that, you know, you really strongly want to hear back from her on, then I'd prefer, you know, that written aspect. But, you know, a lot of times if if it's a casework call, if there's something where we're going to need to do some work on behalf of a constituent, I know in that case, I appreciate a phone call so that way I can do back and forth question and answer in case we need more information.
I'm recognizing in thinking through everything y'all have shared today that what we should have on our text, how do Texas bills become a law? We need pictures of Christina and Ryan and Lonnie and Jason and Madeline and the blood, sweat, and tears of so many staff who really provide this bridge between constituents and advocates and their bosses who are making these critical decisions for Texans. We had one more question come through just a moment ago, and it was around, you know, does it help in whether it's a letter or a call or a meeting to have research articles or links that help create a more robust picture of the issue beyond that emotional connection or personal story that a few of you mentioned along the way as well?
Yeah, I mean, if you have research that kind of goes with your story and everything like that, it gives it more weight. I mean, at least as far as like I'm concerned. So yeah, I mean, if you have research and stuff like that that backs up everything that you're saying, bring it with you. It helps.
Thank you.
I saw a lot of head nods go with that, so I think there's a lot of agreement there. All right, do we have, I'm also kind of trying to figure out the chat.
Well, I mean, one thing I would comment on that came up along the way was just that the slides and the recording today will be made available to all registrants, and we'll have it posted on our website. So that one always comes up.
Can I offer one final thought? Just remember, this is all a human process, right? So ask yourself, if you make a one-pager or if you're gonna reach out, ask yourself, would this work for me? Would I feel compelled one way or another by reading this document, or by the message I'm sending, or by this testimony I'm going to give? Just think about what in your life has stuck with you or made a difference and made a point, and utilize that. Do that in your advocacy.
That's, Ryan, that is the perfect way to end this webinar. So thanks for speaking up on that. And just want to, again, I know we've said this a few times throughout, thanks so much to all 5 of our staffers from inside the Capitol that have taken time out of your really, really busy schedules to join us today and to talk about, you know, your knowledge and expertise and giving those tips to our audience. So thank y'all so much. And again, you know, look for those emails to be going out soon with the link, not with the link, with the webinar and the resources here that we provided with the slideshow. So, but thank you all so much for joining us. Have a good rest of your day and a good rest of your week. Thank you.